Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. Ukraine War Update extra video, giving you extra tidbits and nuggets to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. We're going to go first to a book that I've just finished reading or listening to by Owen Matthews called Overreach, the Inside Story of Putin's War Against Ukraine. I'm going to do a video at some point talking about or showing you the books that I've read over the course of the war that pertain to this war and my thoughts on them and whether you should grab them. I think you should grab this one. In fact, all the ones I've read, apart from one that I gave up after about 10 pages that was absolutely terrible. It's called Putin's Playbook, I think. It was just a terrible book. This is really good, Overreach. And it is, I think Owen Matthews has relatives. I think his descendants are Ukrainian. But yeah, there's an excerpt from this book that talks about Putin and negotiation, which I thought, I love it when you read books and there's just little bits that are just really good nuggets that are worthy of discussion, and this is one of them. So this is going back to 2019 when there were ongoing negotiations and whatnot between Russia and Ukraine post 2013 Maidan. Actually, I'm going to join it at this second highlighted paragraph here. But though the implementation of Minsk 1 and Minsk 2 was going nowhere, so these were agreements that were forced really upon Ukraine by other entities with Russia that were to Russia's benefit. Zelensky pushed France and Germany to facilitate personal peace talks between him and Putin. The two leaders met for the first and only time in Paris on 9th of December 2019. From the first moments of the meeting, Zelensky was visibly nervous. During the protocol photo shoot before the talks, Zelensky mistakenly took Putin's place, then turned to talk to journalists and inadvertently showed Ukraine's position papers for the talks to photographers. Oops. That's not going to go down well. Putin, as usual, was late. So Putin does this an awful lot. It is late because it's a way of him showing power. He's controlling the landscape, isn't he, of how, and the processes of how any negotiations or talk are taking place. And what's it recently where he was waiting for, was it Xi Jinping, not the last time, but sometime before, where he was kept waiting, and it was a really big statement, I think. I'm sure that was Xi Jinping. But anyway, Putin, as usual, was late. The photo shoot over, Putin leaned over to Zelensky, quote, "Once everyone has left, we will start negotiations," the Russian president said, stating the obvious in order to demonstrate that he was in charge. All these little interesting psychological mechanisms it's all about status and about power. Publicly, Zelensky said he hoped to resume the dialogue for peace, but both he and Putin knew that October's no capitulation protests had shown how limited Zelensky's room for compromise was at home. Putin, for his part, intended to test how far the Ukrainian president's reopening of talks could be used to the Kremlin's advantage. Zelensky and Putin's meeting made no political progress, nor could it, as Zelensky had already made significant concessions in October, but had been thwarted by his own nationalist opposition. Putin's hectoring style did not help. Quote, and this is what I think is diamond. Quote, "Putin knew how to give orders, but he didn't know how to negotiate," recalled Mendel. For more than 2 decades, no one had contradicted him, nor had anyone been willing to bring him bad news. This made Putin a weak negotiator. Instead, he used only blackmail and various instruments of war to negotiate. Fascinating. I don't know who this chap Mendel is, but he's obviously in the meeting. Like, this is it makes so much sense. If you've lived for 20 years in a context of giving orders, of basically being a dictator, when no one has the guts to speak out against you, what you say goes, and people are afraid to give you bad news. And you could argue that this whole war was predicated upon that exact kind of situation, whereby people weren't prepared to say, "This is a fucking crazy idea, mate, don't do this," or no one wanted to give him news that wasn't overly rosy, and so therefore he had a completely distorted sense of what Ukraine was, whether they would repel the Russians or not want the Russians to be there, etc., etc., etc. And you get this scenario where the person at the top of this pillar of power has ultimate power and is just people are just afraid. And so within his own administration. So you take that to, he doesn't negotiate. So Putin doesn't negotiate domestically. So in the UK, for example, we have Prime Minister's Question Times, and it happens once a week where Prime Minister goes into the House of Commons and they have a pre-selected sort of bunch of topics they're going to talk about, but so they can be at least prepared. But basically, he's then hectored by the opposition leader first. You get something like, is it 6 questions? And then other opposition leaders, and then it goes, around the House. And then you get some coming from the ruling party. So in this case, you'd have Rishi Sunak go into Prime Minister's Question Time with his book, standing up and saying, blah, 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 aren't we amazing? And then Keir Starmer for the Labour standing up and saying, you guys suck, and can you answer this? Because you suck. And then Rishi Sunak stands up and goes, no, we don't suck. Actually, here's the answer to that, except I'm not really going to answer it. I'm going to sidestep it because I don't really answer questions directly. And you suck. And then Keir Starmer stands up and says, actually, I don't suck. You suck. And here's another question. And blah, blah, blah. And so it goes on. But the point is that Sunak, to some degree, in public, is held to account and then has to jockey for position amongst all the people, all the parliament there, and people in the country who this gets recorded, this gets televised, but then it also goes on TV and is hassled by journalists. So Rishi Sunak will go on and talk about what his plans are for the NHS, for example, and journalists will say, hang on, that's absolute nonsense, it's not costed, blah, 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 and challenge him and any leader. I'm just using Rishi Sunak because he's the leader at the moment. And so our leaders are held to account by the public, by journalists, by the media in general, and by parliamentarians. And it's done in a way that means that the leader has to stay on their feet, has to be really with it, and also is constantly having to compromise or negotiate in order to get things through Parliament. Because if he doesn't have an outright majority, he might have an outright majority, but some of these policies might not be as popular with all of his party. So you get the whips involved for whipping up votes that then vote for you. But if you get a split, you might need some people from the other side, and you've got negotiation. So this is all about negotiations. Putin has none of that. Like, he's a dictator. This is all a sham. Like, the elections are a sham, pretty much. And what I say goes. No one's going to challenge me in my own parliament, in the Duma. No one's going to challenge me in the media space, because otherwise you'll end up in a gulag. No one's going to challenge me in public. And so I am not used to being challenged. So I go through my life as Putin. What I say goes. So then he goes to a meeting with, of course, he rarely goes to these big meetings, especially now since 2014. He's been like, see you later, mate. You're not part of the G7, G20, yada, yada. So he doesn't really negotiate much. So here's an example where he goes to negotiate with Zelensky, and someone's looking in on this going, this guy doesn't know how to negotiate. He's just basically saying, here's what I say, and if you don't do this, war type thing. Because, of course, he has no sense of being able to give an inch at all, because he's never needed to give an inch. And so I just find that is obvious, but fascinating. So I'm going to read that bit again. For more than Putin knew how to give orders, but he didn't know how to negotiate, recalled Mendel. For more than 2 decades, no one had contradicted him, nor had anyone been willing to bring him bad news. This made Putin a weak negotiator. Instead, he used only blackmail and various instruments of war to negotiate. In other words, there will be no kind of settlement, because he will go in with what he wants, and if he doesn't get what he wants, he'll just threaten you. Now, if you're talking about going forward into negotiations for an end to this war, bear that in mind. Bear in mind that Putin will go into any negotiations thinking he will just get his way, and he will not be willing to compromise. As it continues here, but the meeting did at least yield a ceasefire. Even before the Paris summit, the death tolls from the sporadic fighting along the line of control in Donbass were far smaller than they had been during the heavy fighting early in the war. In 2017, 60 were killed and 308 wounded on both sides. In 2018, 51 were killed and 304 injured. In 2019, there were 36 dead and 129 wounded, according to the Ukrainian General Staff and the LDNL's own reports. After the Paris deal, casualty figures would sink to single figures and a ceasefire held until February 2022. But Zelensky's Ukraine was becoming a problem for Putin. The traditional methods that the Kremlin had hitherto used to control governments in Kyiv, gas wars, corrupting ministers, and using oligarchic media influence were no longer working on Zelensky, as Zelensky moved to curb the power of the oligarchs, including his own one-time patron, Kolomoisky. That was really interesting. So one of the guys that got him into power ended up being held to account by Zelensky, which is a bold move. Most fatefully, Zelensky also began strengthening Ukraine's ties to NATO and accelerating its path to membership. To the Kremlin, it was further proof that Zelensky was Washington's puppet. Zelensky's desire to move Ukraine from being a military and political ally of the West to becoming a fully integrated member of the Western Alliance was the sum of all the Kremlin's fears. And of course, what you must remember there, it's not like NATO encroaching, it's Zelensky with his own agency and his administration going to NATO, going to the EU, wanting to move. You know, as I said before, there's no surprise that after the Warsaw Pact ended, those Warsaw Pact countries went straight to NATO of their own volition. It's like, you know, it's very easy to blame NATO. That's just the cheap Russian thing to do as part of the Russian narrative, like NATO encroachment. But actually, you know, it's forgetting the agency of the people involved. Anyway, we're going to move to Canada now. And this is a long comment from Karen Spennock, who says, "Hi Jonathan, Canadian here. I've listened to many of your rants, and I do hope that you will take the time to read this long-winded comment as it pertains to Canada's contribution to NATO." This is a month old, actually. I meant to share this with you ages ago. "I would like you to know that I'm just an average Canadian with no special military or economic knowledge. I am getting upset with the Eurocentric view of Canada's contribution to NATO. After World War II, the US decided to become a military superpower and thus spent a large portion of their GDP on military expenditures. Canadians have always preferred to wear the blue helmets of peacekeepers. Our ideals, morals and democratic principles greatly align with those of Europe. In World War I, 7% of our population went overseas to fight for our European allies. In World War II, 10% of our population went overseas to fight, including about 40,000 Ukrainian Canadians. We came the first time you asked for help. Canada was one of the 12 founding members of NATO, and we have had military stationed in Europe since 1951. We all know someone who was born in Germany or France because their father was stationed there. We had bases in Europe to protect your populations and territories as you rebuilt your countries. We continue to have bases in Europe today. Please allow me to explain a bit about Canada so that you've a greater understanding of my thoughts. Canada is about the same geographical size of Europe, including the Russian portion of Europe. Our population is just under 39 million. Yes, we are very spread out. 90% of our population lives within 240 kilometers of the US border. Canada and the US share the longest unprotected border in the world. The Trans-Canada Highway, which runs east-west, is over 7,800 kilometers. Imagine the cost of keeping that ploughed all winter. The distance from Toronto to the northernmost point in Canada is further. One could move the entire population of any Scandinavian country into northern Ontario and we wouldn't even notice them there. I live in southern Ontario with Toronto as our capital. It is over 2,200 kilometres to the capital of the next province to the west. We have a single payer government healthcare. I live near a hospital and regularly hear helicopters bringing medevac patients. So much just costs more in Canada that you don't understand. It is closer and cheaper to send goods from our east coast to Europe than our east coast to our west coast. Really interesting points there that I hadn't really thought about. Just the cost of logistics in Canada, of keeping roads open, of keeping railways open, of transporting anything anywhere. Incredible. Canada became a nation in 1867. In those 157 years, we have never had a battle on our soil, nor have we invaded any country or started a war. We are a peaceful people. The only country that can invade us by land is the USA. Given their superpower status, we cannot protect ourselves against them. We do need to protect both our skies and our coastline. But let's be honest, if there are any missiles flying in Canadian airspace, they're headed for the US. And yes, as a good neighbour and ally, it is our responsibility to protect the US from such risks. We are currently spending about $5 billion a year over the next 6 years to upgrade our northern air defences. Unlike the rest of NATO, Canada is not spending all of its military budget defending our own country. Our current main European base is in Latvia. We are currently in a 3-year project to spend $2.6 billion in Latvia. We are paying Latvians to expand and update our military base. We are paying to upgrade our military equipment to better support Latvia's needs. We are buying tanks and IFVs to support Latvia, and we will never use to protect ourselves. We are renting storage for our military equipment from Latvians. Our military personnel's paychecks are being spent in the Latvian economy. I hope you can see how much this differs from all other European countries in NATO. So let's compare Canada with a population of just under 39 million to Poland with a population of just over 41 million. In 2023, Poland spent 29.1 billion on military. They are heralded as stepping up big time, and they border Belarus and Ukraine, leaving them one of the next to be invaded should Ukraine fall. Canada has spent $28.9 billion in 2023, and we are seen as freeloaders, even though we are half a world away. Can someone please tell me what Canada is getting for free? There is no thank you for Canada for helping to protect Europe. There is only disdain. There is no reciprocity here. NATO is a one-way street for Canada. Really interesting how the alliance in this case is, you can talk about being a net contributor. So here Canada is kind of a net contributor. They don't really draw from NATO. By point of fact, there are no bases in Canada, particularly NATO bases. There's nothing protecting Canada. They're not particularly at risk. And you might ask, well, actually, is it worth Canada being in NATO? Is that just a kind of leftover due to historical connections and its positioning, etc., etc.? So really interesting conversation to be had around that. And Canada, I've heard Canadians get upset that Trudeau's not spending enough or Canada's not spending enough on their military and not doing enough for Ukraine, etc., etc. I don't think I've said that previously. If I say things like that, I'm usually voicing other people's concerns. I don't know that I've had an opinion on Canada and how much they have or haven't contributed to the war in Ukraine and etc., etc. Nonetheless, correct me if I'm wrong. Canada has the potential of having a fascist government elected to our south. A member of Trump's last administration said something to the effect that there is no reason for Canada to even exist as a country. The one resource that Canada has more of than any other country in the world is fresh water. A large part of the US has been suffering from drought for years. If there's fascism to our south and the US decides to invade Canada, is Europe and NATO coming to help defend us? Will Europe send 10% of their population to fight for us? Will European NATO countries set up military bases in Canada to fight the US? I think not. There's no reciprocity here. NATO is a one-way street for Canada. That's a hypothetical that I don't know. That's too difficult to know if the US would actually do that. I mean, the likelihood of that is real speculation that Europe would or wouldn't do anything. I don't think we can even remotely know that, to be perfectly honest. So I would possibly I'm with everything else. I just think that last paragraph might be a little bit dubious. Nonetheless, for over 100 years, Canada has been militarily supporting Europe. A thank you would be appreciated. Thank you. NATO has picked up an arbitrary way to measure each member's participation percentage of GDP. This may work for Europe, but it doesn't work for Canada. If that measure were based on per capita expenditure, I think Canada would be second only to USA. But that wouldn't work for the other 29 European countries. If you want Canada to leave NATO because, in your opinion, we are not doing enough, just ask us to leave. We can gladly spend our money supporting Ukraine. But if you want us to stay and want to benefit from all that we do for Europe, then please stop trash talking us. Recognise that we are in a unique position from any other country in NATO and express gratitude whether we spend according to your measurements or not, but please stop looking a gift horse in the mouth. It sounds like I've said something against Canada, but I'm fairly sure I haven't, but maybe I have. Who knows? What I would say is, some salient points there. The thing about the percentage of GDP is that's not like a European metric or my metric, or that's like the NATO metric. And so if you're part of NATO and that's the NATO agreement, then that's the way you measure it. And if you're a paid up member of NATO and you've agreed to that, then that's an agreement that you've adopted to. That's kind of like the contract, if you like. I think there's possibly a bit of an issue with that. But certainly, I mean, it's interesting to look at any alliance and wonder which countries benefit more and less out of an alliance, and there will be a spectrum. There will be some countries that really benefit out of a collective alliance, and other countries that won't. But it's an insurance policy just in case they do. But as far as Canada is concerned, of course, because of their geographical position, geopolitical position, and having the US to the south, it's unlikely that they are going to need to draw upon NATO to protect their borders. But it's not about, NATO isn't just about protecting each individual country's borders, it's about protecting interests. And if Canada have international interests that require global stability, global security, global economic stability that NATO arguably provides, then that is why Canada will remain in NATO, and why it's in their best interest to do so. You pal up with these people, then you, by osmosis, you get, preferential trade deals, you just part of the club, etc., etc. So there will be benefits that come out of this that aren't just in terms of border security. But some interesting points there concerning Canada, and well made. Sorry, Karen, if you thought I've said something, or whether this is just a general response to people, because I have heard similar things about Canada and their positioning. A Canadian volunteer, Paul Hughes, sticking on Canada. This is Anton Gerashchenko talking about this. A Canadian volunteer, Paul Hughes, opened a workshop in Kharkiv where more than 300 military and volunteer vehicles have been repaired in 1 year. The 59-year-old farmer and hockey coach from Calgary moved to Ukraine at the beginning of the Russian full-scale invasion, and also created the humanitarian organisation HUGS, H-U-G-S, which provides foods, clothing and medicine to residents in frontline areas. Quote, "On my farm in Canada, we grow food and provide it to people in need," Paul says. Although Mr. Hughes does not have Ukrainian roots, he has been surrounded by Ukrainians in Canada since childhood. So remember, Canada has the biggest Ukrainian diaspora outside of Ukraine. Quote, "I played hockey with the Ukrainians, went to school with them. My first girlfriend was Ukrainian. I know Ukrainian food, Vareniki. I know Ukrainian music culture. I know what a Vyshyvanka is. Ukraine has had a great influence on Canada. It helped build the country. So many Canadians want to help Ukraine resist the invaders," Paul says. "I left Canada on March 1st, 2022, crossed the Polish border 2 days later, and I've been in the country ever since. Over time, I realised that Kharkiv is a very important centre for helping people in Ukraine. Moreover, Kharkiv is a place where people know how to achieve their goals." End quote. Mr. Hughes was joined in Ukraine by his 21-year-old son, Mac, who volunteers in Kherson region. Quote, "It's hard to be in the trenches. It's hard to be a combat medic. It's hard to be under fire. It's hard to be a person who has lost their family," the volunteer says. Continuing, "We help with medical care. We supervise 3 clinics in Kharkiv. We also implement the SMART program for displaced children in shelters, involve them in various activities and try to make children smile," Paul says. The volunteer has no plans to leave Ukraine until the war is over. Quote, "It's like being a firefighter. It's fighting fire. And you ask a firefighter, when are you going home? When the fire is out, then you can go back," Paul says. "Thank you. Ukraine is honoured to have such amazing friends," says Gerashchenko. And here is this chap. So here's his chap with his, I like his Canadian shirt there with the half trident, half maple leaf. But anyway, there are so many great people from around the world doing all of these wonderful things to support Ukraine. And here's one of them. I just thought I'd throw that in with the rest of the Canadian comment I had there. Right. We're going to move on to another Pekka Kaliniemi's Vatnik Soup threads. So this is one of his detailed threads about certain people who end up being numpties. And this is why they're numpties concerning the Ukraine war. And so we're going to be dealing with Robert Kennedy Jr. RKJ is is a third-party candidate in the presidential elections. He was originally thought to be someone that was going to cost the Democrats the most votes, but then over recent time, more and more Republicans have moved to support Kennedy, and therefore you've got a situation now where both Trump and Biden are having a go at Kennedy because they both see him as a threat, which is interesting. But anyway, he is not someone I think should be entertained as a vote. If you're concerned about all the things that he's worried about, so if you're concerned about, say, we won't go into that. Let's just go into the Vatnik Soup thread. So I'll introduce an American conspiracy theorist, lawyer and politician, Robert Kennedy Jr. He's best known for being the nephew of JFK and for constantly promoting conspiratorial and false information, says Kaluniemi. Robert comes from the prestigious Kennedy family, and his father was a senator and attorney general, Robert F. Kennedy. He was just 9 years old when his uncle JFK was assassinated. 5 years later, his father was also murdered. During the early 80s, Robert had to resign as the assistant district attorney for Manhattan after failing his bar exam. A year later, he was charged with heroin possession and went into rehab. He soon became active in the environmental justice and started lobbying and litigating for the protection of waterways and renewable energy. RFK Jr. is a strong advocate for environmental issues and has sued factory farms in North Carolina, Oklahoma, Maryland, and Iowa. He's also a strong opponent of the oil and coal industries. Robert is one of the key figures in the anti-vaccine movement. He's claimed to be pro-vaccine, but as the chairman of Children's Health Defense, CHD, an anti-vaccine advocacy group, he's made connections between autism, ADHD, cancer, and autoimmune diseases, and vaccines, fluoride, and wireless communications like 5G. I mean, all of these have been debunked, right? CHD was one of, and I don't want you to have a big argument about this in the thread. You're not going to convince me right now, I can tell you. CHD was one of the top buyers of anti-vaccine advertisement on Facebook during late 2018 and early 2019. RFK Jr. was among the 12 so-called super spreaders of vaccine-related disinformation. In January 2017, Bob Jr. met with Donald Trump to discuss a position in the Trump administration, and RFK Jr. was supposed to become the chairman of the Vaccine Safety Task Force, but Trump's spokeswoman stated that, quote, no final decision has been made. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Robert promoted the idea that Bill Gates would cut off access to money of people who refused to get vaccinated. In his 2021 book, which is, of course, complete nonsense, The Real Anthony Fauci, he called Fauci, quote, a powerful technocrat who helped orchestrate and execute 2020's historic coup d'etat against Western democracy. In his January 2022 speech at the Auschwitz Memorial, Robert declared that vaccine-hesitant people in the US had it worse than Anne Frank under Nazi occupation. Ooh, that's a risky thing to say in that context. Quote, even in Hitler's Germany, you could hide in the attic like Anne Frank did. Wow. He's also suggested that CIA was involved in the assassination of his uncle and that Sirhan wasn't responsible for his father's murder. He visited him in prison in 2017. As a Democrat, RFK Jr. has gone into weird places. On the one hand, he supports abortion rights and gun control. On the other hand, he's a rabid anti-vaxxer and a frequent visitor at outlets like Fox News and InfoWars. Ugh. He was also about to appear as a speaker at the Reawaken America tour, a far-right and Christian nationalist protest movement, with prominent conservative speakers like Michael Flynn and Roger Stone. But his participation was eventually cancelled. These rallies have been promoting several conspiracy theories, including COVID-19 related disinformation, QAnon, and Stop the Steal. So really heavily involved, not in democratic politics there, but more like the populism associated with MAGA Trumpism, which is why he's attracting a lot of those voters now away from Trump, which is why Trump is now speaking out very publicly against RFK. So in May 2023, RFK Jr. gave an interview to Unheard, talking about vaccines, Big Pharma, and of course Ukraine. So where we get onto Ukraine, but that's all the background to where he sits politically. Kind of all over the shop, really. Now let's see how many pro-Kremlin narratives he can fit in one interview. One, he said that the, quote, the Russians have repeatedly offered to settle, and that they respected the Minsk agreement. Both Russians and Ukrainians broke the agreement, which is just nonsense. Two, quote, the Russians are killing Ukrainians at a ratio of either 1-5 or 1-8, using data from serial liar Douglas McGregor and or from the Dr. Teixeira leaks. So completely wrong. Thirdly, he said, quote, the Donbass region, which is 80% ethnic Russian, and Russians that were being systematically killed by the Ukrainian government, referring to the, quote, genocide in Donbass. BS. I mean, this is just absolute. I mean, you can go and read some of the claims he's making. It's just complete nonsense. And fourthly, we, quote, we need to remove our Aegis missile systems from 70 miles from the Russian border. There are no Aegis on the Russian border, so I don't know where he's getting that from. Number 5, quote, we made a commitment to Russia, to Gorbachev, that we would not move NATO 1 inch to the east. Of course, this was never promised. This is a really common thing, actually. A lot of people genuinely believe this. Gorbachev has denied this. This is supposed to be something that was said. At most, it would have been something that was discussed, but it wasn't a formal agreement. There was none of this kind of, NATO will agree to do this if NATO doesn't move to the east. But the fact that Kennedy is repeating that nonsense is problematic. Anyway, 6th, he said, quote, what happened in the Ukraine is that the US supported essentially a coup d'etat in 2014 against the democratically elected government of Ukraine. End quote. Of course, it was not a coup by any measure, and democracy in Ukraine was supported only by the US NGOs like NED. 7, quote, we have telephone call transcripts of Victoria Nuland, one of the neocons in the White House, handpicking the new cabinet. Nuland never picked any cabinet, but wanted to fast track the democracy process in Ukraine instead of stalling like the EU did, hence F the EU, which is what Victoria Nuland had previously said. 7, quote, they killed 14,000 Russians in Donbass, the Ukrainian government. As you can see, RFK Jr. believes everything that's spoon-fed to him by the anti-war coalition, scare quotes, anti-war coalition. In April 2023, it became official. RFK Jr. is challenging Joe Biden for the Democratic presidential nomination. And by the way, all of these claims are linked to and have supporting evidence along with them. I just say that in case you're listening rather than watching. Anyway, in April 2023, it became official. He's running for Democratic presidential nomination. The support for this came from strangest of places, the Republican PR powerhouses and serial liars Steve Bannon and Roger Stone. CBS News reports claim that Steve Bannon spent months in coaxing RFK Jr. into running. According to them, Bannon had stated that RFK Jr. campaigning could have twofold benefits. He'd be a useful chaos agent and could also promote anti-vaccine sentiment around the country. Robert has denied these allegations, tweeting that Bannon has nothing to do with my presidential campaign. On his War Room podcast, Bannon stated that RFK Jr. received a, quote, standing ovation from a fervent MAGA crowd, and people even started suggesting a Trump-Kennedy ticket. There's been talk about actually Kennedy running as VP for Trump, but I don't think that that's going to happen, certainly not now. Stone agreed with this sentiment, calling Trump-Kennedy a dream ticket. It also seems that Michael Flynn, Trump's former national security advisor, is another RFK Jr. fan, tweeting that he really likes this presidential candidate's attitude. Naturally, this is all just show. What the MAGA gang wants is a Trojan horse inside the Democrat Party so that the PR damage against Joe Biden can be maximized. All the other candidates were kind of meh and mostly agreed with Joe on everything, so it made sense to them to promote a conspiracy theorist who is pretty much a Democrat version of Donald Trump. I'm pretty sure we're going to see yet another wave of stolen election accusations after RFK Jr. loses against Biden, except maybe from Fox News, as the last time cost them, except maybe from Fox News, as it cost them last time, didn't it, in sorting out all of that money going to Dominion, and they've got the Smartmatics case still to go. Will at least Susan Sarandon, the actress from Thelma and Louise, will probably vote for Bob Jr. And maybe far left fake news bloggers, Aaron Mate and Max Blumenthal, and the pro-authoritarian folk over at Code Pink. So that's just a little look into RFK Jr. If you're wondering what his views are on Ukraine-Russia war, just I ask the Kremlin, and you'll get RFK Jr.'s views. Not someone that I would advocate voting for at all for a whole host of reasons, but particularly with regard to Ukraine. He is a victim of disinformation. What do we do about disinformation? Well, Euromaidan Press says, surprisingly, humour is a way of countering Russian disinformation. Aniet Raya reveals, quote, humour, Russians are mad about it, she said at XLMF, the Ukrainian Centre for Countering Disinformation, where she works, came to understanding that just debunking is not enough, and there are many other more efficient ways. One is ridiculing Russian absurd claims. Someone was saying on my thread the other day that what they find, I think many viewers said this, I know John Larkin likes to do this, and a number of others, but, taking on the trolls and ridiculing them, they don't like having a mickey taken out of them, and actually can be a really effective way of belittling sources of disinformation that can be, these people, Russian disinformation agents, are not interested in good faith dialogue. So they will present a claim, and remember Brandolini's law, the bullshit asymmetry. So they can present a claim that takes them 10 seconds to copy and paste. You sit there and debunk the claim, and it takes you half an hour to put this big piece together, and then you send it to them, and there's no point. They're not interested because they're literally not paid to be interested. This is their job, and their job is not. It's a bit like when you get Jehovah's Witnesses that come around to your door and witness at your door. They are not allowed to accept documents from you. I love speaking to JWs because as a philosopher of religion, I've got all the arguments, and they are there for like 2 hours, and then they go away not having achieved anything, but giving me the opportunity to just go blah. But I've offered them some of my books, and of course they can't take them. They can give you, look, take our book, take our Watchtower magazine or whatever, but we won't take anything from you because this isn't a good faith dialogue. I'm not interested in you disabusing me of my worldview. All I'm interested in doing, all I'm kind of paid to do, if you like, is to try and change your mind. And the Russian trolls have the same outlook, which is, this is our job. There's no point you telling me anything that's debunking my claims because I'm not interested. What you can argue is that it's useful to argue back sometimes so that third parties can look who might be wavering and go, oh yeah, that's some really good argumentation there. But one way is certainly to use humour, and memes are very often the way of doing this, as you can see below here. I like this one. We have no ships in the Black Sea, says Skebieva. Have you looked at on the bottom? It says Budinov. I love that. But yeah, so humour is a way of dealing with disinformation. What are your thoughts on that? I think that's an interesting topic. Now, talking about disagreeing with people, here is something that someone, a British person, says about trying to deal with Americans who've got the wrong opinion about Ukraine, for example. And let me know what you guys think about this kind of opinion. He says, hey, JP, completely unrelated, but I've been struggling with what I consider pretty idiotic Americans. He says, I have been getting into a spat with lately. That's only particular types of people. They accuse me of being rude. My gripe is them spreading misinformation. This seems to come down to a fundamental difference in cultural beliefs. So I wanted to get your opinion on this. In my view, Americans always want to be nice. Europeans, on the other hand, are more direct and do not like people telling lies. I'm going to discuss this in a second, so I'll just read it all first. So I've been calling out some pretty blatant lies that I know are lies, then get accused of wanting to start an argument. So let's say an American tells a blatant lie. Okay, they want all people to be nice, so let's say they tell a lie. They expect all American onlookers to praise their wisdom, even if it is completely wrong, because doing the opposite would be considered rude. I cannot understand that logic. If everyone just praises everyone, they think the world would be a better place. But would it be? See, to someone, lying is worse than me being rude. I wanted to get get your opinion on this. The only reason I resort to being rude in their eyes is because I'm calling out a lie. They might actually believe their lies. The problem is if everyone is never allowed to be rude and is expected to praise whatever other people do, then surely we would go backwards and not progress in wisdom. Debating online is just really hard. I am having a hard time with the cultural differences Americans and Europeans seem to have, and I hate being called rude just for trying to help bring out the truth. You then start questioning if the American way is the right way, like the saying goes, ignorance is bliss, so it's better to be ignorant and polite all the time, or is it better to further wisdom or at the expense of politeness? Lots going on there. First of all, I don't think this is an American thing or a British thing or a European thing or whatever. I remember we used to say, oh, don't talk about religion or politics at the dinner table. You just don't do it. It's not polite. We only talk about, things that we don't get into arguments about. But I think the internet age has changed things, and I think just the modern way of life has changed, and we are much more open. You can talk into. I think that kind of idea that we shouldn't be arguing with each other at the dinner table might be left over from Victorian times, but we're in a place where we've had 40 years of confrontational television now, where people sit down and argue with each other on TV. We have political programs where they argue. We have Prime Minister's Question Times that I was talking about earlier, where that is on television. And so we are used to just having arguments. And I don't think this idea that we shouldn't mention religion and politics at the dinner table is too prevalent anymore. I freaking love a good argument, and it doesn't matter who I'm with and where I'm at. I will have one, and I do it with my parents, and I'll tell them what for. And goodness me, we disagree on pretty much everything. So I think there's that. I think in the internet age, the thing is, and we experience this on the threads below, is that very few people have their own proper name in their avatar, and it means that you hide behind anonymity. And when you hide behind anonymity, you can treat anyone else like they're not real people because you're almost not a real person. And so what happens is the internet age has brought about a very confrontational way of discussing things with people, and you treat other people like you wouldn't treat them in real life. Quite so many times I've said before, like, would you say that to me face to face? Especially, I used to argue, obviously, about religion and stuff, being a philosopher of religion and having written 5,000 articles on my beliefs, over a decade or so. And I used to argue. I argue all the time, but sometimes I'd be like, I'm always trying to have good faith arguments because I'm interested in the ideas, not the person and not whatever. I just like, have I got the right ideas? What are your arguments against me? But if you're going to just outright attack me, and I sometimes get like this when I get frustrated and I get rhetorically abrasive, but that's just a sign of my frustration for someone that is not a good faith interlocutor. Would you say that to me, to my face in real life? No. And if you did, I'll punch you in the face. So you wouldn't. So don't speak to me like that. And the internet age has brought about an era where we are just so much more abrasive. And I think that we also sit in our own echo chambers, and an awful lot of us are just so cemented in our views that we're not very good at having epistemic humility, which is like, I'm humble about what I know, what I don't know, and I'm open to changing my mind. I know earlier on I said, look, you're not going to change my mind on conspiracy theories. What I mean by that is I've researched an awful lot of this stuff. I've written about them for a long time. It's not like you just splurging some nonsense and linking it to some Reddit thread is going to convince me otherwise, right? So that's kind of what I mean. I'm open to change my mind, but you would need to present the burden of evidence is on you for going against the grain of consensus thoughts. So therefore, actually, you have a higher burden. You have to overcome that consensus with some really, really good evidence. I can bore you with justification, theories of justification, whatever. But for me, it's about good faith dialogue and how the question then is how best to change someone's mind. We talked about humor can do that, possibly. Well, no, humor's not a good way of changing someone's mind because you're taking the mickey out of them, but that's a good way of dealing with disinformation where they're not good faith interlocutors, right? But if they are good faith interlocutors, then how do you change someone's mind? And it's so often, I've said this a number of times before, and I'll say it again. I think Jonathan Haidt talked about this, about how rather than going up against someone, especially if you're in the out group. So if you are, Tom Fernby here is a UK based, let's assume a UK based pro Ukraine advocate coming up against an American anti-Ukraine advocate, right? So I'm in the out group in many ways, is Tom, and this person is in this position. We're just butting heads. That very, very rarely causes someone to change their mind. In fact, that kind of activity entrenches people further in their original belief. It's called the backfire effect, where rational evidence against your belief is more likely to get you to more viciously defend your belief rather than change your mind. What is often better, it's all about who delivers the information. I remember one of my best mates, we started the Tippling Philosophers, which is where we get ATP geopolitics, because once a month we used to go down the pub and pick a subject and talk philosophy. I was an atheist, he was a conservative Christian, right? But we're good mates and everything. He's one of my best mates, and he at the time he was a conservative Christian. He's not anymore, but he was a conservative Christian. I could say I won that one, but no, he's had an interesting. He's like an idealist now, very interesting worldview now. But anyway, at the time, he's a conservative Christian who denied evolution. And here was the thing: I spent something like 3 years trying to disabuse him of his misunderstanding of evolution and his belief that evolution didn't exist. And I had given him all the arguments. I've got tons of books on evolution, blah 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 blah. And I must have sowed a seed, but I didn't change his mind. But I sowed that seed whereby he then sent an email to Simon Conway Morris, who was a Cambridge University professor of evolution, but who was a Christian, right? And he sent him that email and said, look, what are your thoughts on X, Y, and Z? And Simon Conway Morris sent him back a really big email, giving all the same arguments that I'd given to my mate. All the same arguments. And then that was the beginning of my mate coming to grips with evolution, and now he's completely changed. And actually, he does psychotherapy now, and he uses a lot of evolutionary thinking and understanding in order to do his work. So it's really interesting. But the point to all of this, the anecdote here, is to say that it was the person that unlocked the change of worldview or the change of opinion. It wasn't the content. And that's really frustrating. So for someone who is embroiled in the world of philosophy, as I am, I used to go and give talks. I remember giving a talk at the University of Southampton, and half the audience were like the Humanist Society and half the audience were the Christian Union. Right? And I was like, I'm going to say what I'm going to say, and half of you are going to entrench in your original beliefs. Even though I think all this rational evidence completely destroys your position, like, you will entrench in your original position, and I'm not going to change your mind. And I'm going to tell you that now. I'm not going to change your mind because I'm the out group, you're your own in group, and you won't take on what I'm going to say. And that's just the way this goes. So thank you for coming. Please listen to what I say. It's interesting, actually. Someone wrote to me by email saying, actually, you did open some doors, and he ended up completely deconverting. Anyway, that's another story. But anyway, the point is it's not about the contents. Like what I'm saying won't change your mind. Right? If you don't want your mind to be changed and you're not susceptible, then what I say will just bounce off you, water off a duck's back. But if I was someone that was in your in-group and I was saying these same things, then there's more chance of changing your mind. So rather than doing this, you need to be in an in-group, and it's a bit like riding on an elephant. And if you kind of nudge that elephant just a little bit that way, nudge it that way, so you're broadly going in the same direction, but actually this elephant's kind of going in slightly that direction. So you kind of nudge it, and you're both moving that direction. Then you might get another elephant that's in this new kind of slightly different in-group, nudging, and then you get this kind of change of direction so that eventually you change your mind and do that 180 flip. But it's not a 180 flip that you change your mind straight away, but actually you're having your positions changed and nudged by people in your in-group, by people that you think are your kind, right? Yeah, okay, I'll take that from you. So my mate writes to another Christian who says evolution is true, and I'm a freaking Oxford professor of it, and hear all the arguments, and he takes that on from him, but he wouldn't take those exact same, and I read the email, I was like, I've been telling you that for 3 years, that for 3 years, that for 3 years, why don't you believe me? Why do you believe him? And it's because the messenger matters, right? So when you are trying to convince people over to a position, it's how you couch these things. So if you are not in the in-group, it's about trying to say things in a nicer possible way so you seem like a nice person, I guess, and that has more chance of landing. Or you can use lots of things like Socratic dialect. So Socrates was very famous for winning arguments by asking questions. And what you do is you ask leading questions, and some interviewers are really good at this, where they'll say, or they use their own words against them or things like that. There are techniques that you can get people in binds where they go, oh yeah, no, I understand how that doesn't make sense. Or you ask these kind of leading questions that move people to answering their own, they're answering questions, and then they realize they're in this position and not that position. You're like, all right, do you understand now? Rather than just blasting them with what they should believe and linking it to somewhere where they can go and find that information. It just, unfortunately, it doesn't work. People don't change their minds very easily, and they're delicate. We are delicate, psychologically delicate people that we need to be treated in particular way. By delicate, I mean we're not delicate, we're like stones, but you need to find those little chinks. You need to find particular ways to get people to change their mind, and everyone's a bit different. Some people change, some people do this, right? Very rarely. Usually they become just as, like, if in the world of religion, if as an atheist philosopher, and you find someone who's a fundamentalist Christian, you do this, occasionally you get someone that goes like that, and then they then become a fundamentalist militant atheist, or vice versa, right? So whatever position you're in, if you do a 180 switch from being a fervent believer of X, you become a fervent believer of not X. And it, because you're angered because you were hoodwinked for believing this all your life and all these kind of things, and that very quick switch is often can be quite dangerous psychologically, or damaging, or it means that you just I'm liable of going off on one here. So how do we best change minds? I think it's such an important question, Tom, and I don't have any particular answer, but it helps if you are in their in-group, which you probably aren't, and that's probably why you're finding things much more difficult. So, for example, when you are a Republican who doesn't believe Ukraine should be supported. This is a really good example, actually. If you're a Republican in America that doesn't believe Ukraine should be supported, so a MAGA Republican, so rather than have a British liberal like me tell you that you should, rather than have an American Democrat tell you that you should, you need to have an American Republican tell you should. That's your own. You're in the same in-group then, and you can take them along with you because they associate with you with so much that actually you are one of mine. We just disagree on this. And if you're a MAGA Republican who believes that you should support Ukraine, someone like Mike Johnson, like, you've got the best chance of convincing a MAGA Republican who doesn't support Ukraine, like, compared to anyone else. It's just all about people who are in your in-group to do a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of mind changing. And there you go. That's probably a good place to leave it. I did want to talk about lying in politicians lying. I've got a really good article on this about Alistair Carmichael that someone put me onto in the threads, but I have to deal with that next time. Thank you so much for watching. I know it's been a long one. It's just a lot of me waffling on. But if you enjoy that, hey, you're in the right place. Take care, everybody. Speak soon.